Hey, here we are, round 3. Welcome back. Now we're going to talk about the forces that impact you and your audience members that are, cultural or societal in nature. These are the things that I talked about here in the giant generator jellyfish model. That's in fact what you should call it, the generator jellyfish model. Okay. And there's big 5 that we talk about, which, if I remember correctly, are gender, age, regionality, occupation, and race and ethnicity. But there's also some other sort of dialectic forces that we will talk about at the end of this presentation as well. And so sometimes you may think like, Adam, what do I even do with this? Like, why are you telling me these things? I can't change, where my audience is from or their age. And in part, I can't change the way that I communicate. And that's a real thing. Like, you can't just like be like, oh, I know, and now I'm going to shift the entire way that I talk. But it's at least a thing to be aware of whenever you're considering the way that you communicate and why you communicate that way. And then also the way that your audience communicates and why they communicate that way. Hopefully that makes sense. One of those ways is gender, okay? And I don't think anybody would disagree with me if I said men and women tend to communicate differently. The research is a little bit not in agreement on this, in part because of some methodological differences, which is sort of above your pay grade. But just in general, a thing for you to be aware of when you think about your own communication, as well as the group that you're communicating to, is that men tend to, in general, broad brush speaking, tend to be more instrumental in their talks, meaning that they are more apt to talk to tell you how to do a specific thing that is, concrete and towards some end, okay? Also communicate to be competitive and also to be assertive. It's a way of like establishing dominance. In general, I study leadership, in fact, and we've found that if you talk more, you're more apt to be perceived as a leader, which is synonymous with saying dominant, right? It doesn't matter even what you're saying. Like, you could just be a stark raving lunatic, but if you talk more, people are like, oh, that guy's got a lot to say. He's clearly the leader here. And that's dumb, and that's a thing we should be aware of, right, in society. The other thing is that, so women tend to talk to support, and so in this way tend to be a little bit more emotional in speech, not in that they sound emotional, but that, I say they, like 60% of you are women, but the reason that women tend to speak is to be supportive as opposed to tell how to do a particular concrete task, right? And so the other thing is they talk to be egalitarian, which I'm going to be real honest, I had to look up. I always sort of knew what it meant in context, but I thought, well, this is a teachable moment. And so an adjective relating to or believing in the principle that all people are equal and deserve equal rights and opportunities. So there you have it. The more you know. And also to be more personal and disclosive, right? So like the idea that we speak to reveal about who we are. And, and sort of putting this lesson together and reflecting on it, I've been thinking about our persuasive talks, which is a thing that you'll do at the end of the semester. And one of the things that we do in that talk is we teach you about rhetoric, which it's like a 3-pointed triangle, but 2 of the points, one of which is logos, so like a rational appeal to believe what I believe, and the other is pathos, so an emotional appeal to believe what I believe. And I don't think that it would shock you, knowing what you know now about the way that men and women communicate differently, is that I tend to see more rational appeals from men and more emotional appeals from women. And that's not inherently bad or good. And in fact, whenever you do your talk, one of the things that, hopefully thinking about this will help you be aware of is that you have a tendency to prefer one over the other, and you need to do both in order to be like a persuasive communicator when it comes to that time, especially if you're speaking to an audience that is both men and women, right? So some other fun, fascinating facts. Women tend to be interrupted more by men, and so that's the thing to watch for in your lab. And so one of those things that once I learned it, I see it everywhere, and it drives me insane. Men actually tend to talk more than women in groups, which is also a thing that like is against stereotypes, right? And then here's the thing that is kind of interesting, is that when people talk, whether men or women, they will try to like even subconsciously adapt themselves to whoever they perceive to be the more powerful members of the audience. And so that's a thing to watch out for, because a lot of times we perceive the more powerful person in the audience to be the person that's like ourselves. And so sometimes it helps to sit back and say, what is the ratio of men to women in the audience? And then, who is the actual person that, is the dominant group that I'm speaking to? And then am I speaking to them in the correct way? So All right, so that's a thing. All right, so another thing that you'll run into is age. And age is, again, a thing that you can't help, but it does affect the way that you talk and the way that your audience will receive your information. So part of it, and we talked about a little bit about it, like in my lab at least, is that the words that you use, right? So I love in the textbook, which I gave to you to read, and I have right here, that that they say, if you're a young person, you may say things like bad, hot, and fat, which is spelled P-H-A-T. And if I remember correctly, from 1999 means pretty hot and tempting, just FYI. But the other thing is that if these are the words that you use, the sad thing is that you're going to be stuck with them forever because of this thing called a cohort effect. So that's why your grandparents all use the same like exclamations and adjectives, and your parents use different ones, right? And then I don't know what you guys are going to be like 60 years old and being like, wow, this nursing home's lit. And and my nursing home bay. I hope you're not in a nursing home when you're 60 anyway. Okay, these are the words that I know. The other fun thing that I learned from reading this that I thought I'd share with you is this concept of vocal fry, which is the thing that Valley girls do, and they talk like this, and it's super annoying, so please don't do that. And then also, women tend to be the language innovators in society. Like, apparently, if you want to know where language is going, you look at 14-year-old girls. That's a thing. So some things to consider here whenever you're actually giving your talk is like, what is the age group that I'm speaking to? And then am I using the correct words, right? Or do I want to speak in a more general vocab? Or if you're, 19 and you're talking to other 19-year-olds, you just talk like you normally talk. If you're giving a presentation to the board of directors of some, that's got like a bunch of 60-year-olds on it, you may not want to use those words that they may not know, okay? So the other thing too is like, remember that age has different, you have different life experiences. And so the example that I used in my lab is I gave a talk way back in 2008. It's 10 years ago, Jesus, on Facebook, right? Which at that point in 2008, it was 4 years old. It had just become available to people not in college. And we were talking about using it to promote your 4-H program. This was at a 4-H conference. And I, of course, me being at the time 23, I think, I was like, oh man, everybody will love Facebook and want to use it, and immediately recognize that it will be super useful to their program, to promote it, especially with the younger folk, right? And then I get this old guy in the back of the room, and he's like, hey, because we were setting up a Facebook page. And he was like, do I have to use my real name? And I was like, well, I mean, it'll be easier for people to find you, but I guess if you wanted to use a handle, that's a thing you could do. And so he came up with some weird handle. And then he's like, do I have to use my real picture? And I was like, who even are you? And are you hiding from the government? I don't know. And then it finally came out that he had real security concerns because, of course, his life experience was very different. Like, the internet was this scary thing that he didn't know about, and he was afraid to set up a Facebook page with his real name and, picture, which for you and me is a thing that we would never consider, right? At one point, he even asked me, he said, so I saw on your Facebook page where it says that you're here presenting in Omaha. Isn't somebody going to rob your house? And I was like, what? And I didn't even know how to respond to that. I was like, well, I have locks, and also I don't live in a place where people get robbed. But anyway, so those are things to take into consideration. Like, what is the experience of the age group that you're speaking to, and how can you alter, the vocab that you use, and also anticipate some of the, issues that those people will have with your talk. Okay. The other thing here is the concept of pedagogy versus andragogy, right? So if you're teaching, particularly in your training demo, if you're a young person, and you go out and you teach a bunch of 10-year-olds how to do something, that's pedagogy, okay? So broad brush, the big thing is that they've never had to do that before, and they are in sponge mode where they're just soaking up information. And so you come along and you tell them a thing that they've never known before, and they just are like, all right, cool. But if you're, Joe Blow college student that's 22 and you have to go out and give a talk to a group of people that are in their 40s and 50s, that's andragogy, meaning you're teaching grown-ups. And the thing that you need to know about that is that before they have a lot more constructs and experiences that they're running your talk through, and they're not going to soak it up like a sponge. They have to make it fit with all the things that they already know. So in a lot of ways, you have to do the unlearning before you can teach them a new thing, right? So know that the older the group is that you're teaching, the less apt they are to just immediately accept the thing that you're explaining. Hopefully that makes some sense. Wow, this is going to be a long video. Regionality is a fun one. Because if you're from the Midwest and you go to the Southeast and give a talk, they're going to use a different dialect. They're going to have like a twang or a drawl or whatever, but they're also going to use different words for different things, right? My fiance is from the Northeast, and she always talks about taking her car to get a lube oil filter, and I'm like, what is a lube oil filter? Like, is that like I don't understand. And then I realized that she's talking about an oil change, right? Like, because I'm from the South and we say oil change. And so, and that's a dumb thing. But like, that's, if you're trying to connect with your audience, that's a thing that, you need to be aware is going to be a barrier. And so I have a fun graph for you. This is the generic names for soft drinks by county. By the way, Okeechobee, where I'm from, is right here. And for some reason, we're other. And I'm going to guess that other is cold drinks, because that's what you call it where I'm from. Like, you can go get a cold drink. Yeah, I'm going to get a cold drink. What kind of cold drink you want? I want a Coke. All right. But, like if you're from the South, the closer you get to Atlanta, where Coke's bottled, everything is Coke, right? Like, what do you want? Give me a Coke. What kind of Coke do you want? Dr. Pepper. Yeah. If you're from, which makes no sense, just FYI. If you're from up here, you got soda. If you're over here, pop. And weirdly, Missouri right here has, is all over the map, but also has this weird north-south schism where we've got soda over here and then pop here. And it's because of migration patterns of people. Just fascinating fact. I could talk all day about this, actually. This is a lot of fun. Anybody from here? Anyway, okay, all right, moving on. So another one here to think about is ethnicity and race, and in parentheses there I also have and culture, okay? And so this is just a thing that we're all aware of, right? Like, people from different ethnicities have, entirely different cultures and backgrounds oftentimes, and that will affect the way that they, communicate with you. So just, okay, FYI, race in general is based on physical appearance, okay? And there's some controversy surrounding this, particularly as genetic testing becomes more prevalent. And then ethnicity is different, and it generally refers to like a shared cultural or learned behaviors, right? And so sort of the stock answer for this is that remember the Hutu and the Tutsi and the Rwandan genocide? They're the same race, different ethnicities, right? And so they didn't get along. So the other thing to recognize is that ethnicities have a common language pattern. Another example might be like your, like I think the term is Anglo-Saxon or whatever, so race. But ethnicity might be German, Irish, English, et cetera, et cetera. So, but just know that when people go back and forth between like sort of their own ethnicity and then communicating more broadly in the world, they do this thing called code switching, which is actually an NPR podcast. And it just means that like you may communicate differently with your ethnic group than you do with, sort of the general public. And your ethnic group, I mean, used broadly, like that term broadly, it could mean like for me, whenever I go back to like Okeechobee, Florida, like I talk about different things. I develop a drawl, which is a lot of fun in case you don't know me, but if you develop a drawl. And so you just sort of, move back and forth between different language patterns that exist. So things for you to be aware of in your talk, whenever you give a presentation, is that if you happen to be giving it to a different ethnic group, just know that will be a barrier because you have different language patterns. Sometimes there's just not a way to overcome that. I wish that, man, we could talk all day about this, but I won't because I need to make the video shorter. Another thing to think about is education and occupation, all right? And so we talked a little bit about this whenever we were doing our audience analysis. Generally, the more educated somebody is, the more they talk like everybody else. And that sounds really dumb, but when you consider that, you come to school and you're at Mizzou, and here you have a teacher from Florida. You've also got a teacher in this department, at least from Nebraska, and a teacher from Missouri, and a teacher from New York State, et cetera, et cetera. You get kind of a hodgepodge of stuff. And so people that are college educated tend to speak more the same than somebody that was not college educated. And that is because dialects like form in isolation. Like the more isolated you are, the stronger your dialect is going to be, and the more homogenous a group is going to talk the same. that means this. Anyway. All right. So the other thing is that the more educated you are about a specific topic, the more you can use jargon. Okay. And so if you're given a talk, I used to give talks to master gardeners because, believe it or not, I know about gardening. You could use a lot more sort of like technical terminology about plants, and you could use some of the scientific names and stuff like that. But I also used to teach, and this is a fun fact, at Epcot in Florida at their Festival of Flowers. And so you would just be giving a talk to like Joe Blow, a group of 50 people that wandered in off the street at Epcot. And so you would not be able to use that sort of technical jargon because you would assume that they have a lower level of knowledge about that particular thing. So that's a thing to take into consideration, especially when you're doing your training demo, is like, I'm teaching them about this thing, but do they know about the thing for me to be able to use, the language that I would use talking to people who have the same major as me and have that same shared core courses, right? Okay. All right, let's move on. Okay, so I'm going to stop us here because this video is probably way long, and then we're going to power through the last one when we talk about communicating across cultures.